Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to another episode of Blockchain and Beyond. As always, I'm your host Farzan. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about network uptime, decentralization, and also technical conditions that can lead to downtime or impact the uptime of blockchain networks. And I'm kind of doing this episode following up from early this week when Solana had a recent outage. This is an outage which happened on the 1st of October, so yesterday, and the outage lasted for about 6 hours and 20 minutes. So for during this time period, there was degraded performance, potentially no blocks were being produced, which means the network wasn't running, transactions weren't being verified, and a number of validators all had to come together to sort of restart the network at the same time. And a lot of criticism has come from this because when all of the nodes need to come and restart the whole network together, it actually leads to the question about decentralization, and is the network truly decentralized if we're waiting for people to restart the network at the same time before it can begin processing transactions? And this is sort of a more philosophical question to be asking, because decentralization is a matter of opinion. I think at the moment Solana currently isn't as decentralized as it could be. It relies on, a body, and it relies on a number of stakers to actually come together and choose to restart the network, whereas I believe the network should be able to run even without a majority of the nodes being active, or having to come together to restart the network. But I do want to talk about sort of the technical side of things, and why these outages can happen. So I was just looking around on Reddit and I came across this thread which kind of sums up how Solana works and why these outages can happen. So Solana elects a leader which the entire network must trust to be reliable. This node can be destroyed or brought down temporarily to cause a slew of uptime issues. So what this means is, how Solana works is that it picks a node who is staking Solana to be the leader, and this leader will produce blocks and verify transactions for a period of time. And what that means is, if we can actually bring down that particular node, it can actually cause issues with the uptime. Now, tying this back to the event which happened earlier this week with Solana's downtime, what happened from my understanding was there was a misconfiguration of one of the nodes which was elected to be the leader. So on this node, there was two Solana validator instances running at the same time. So when this node was chosen, both of these instances would produce blocks. So one side would be producing one set of blocks and the other side would produce another set of blocks. And these both got propagated to the network, which caused a soft fork in the network, and nodes couldn't decide which soft fork to actually follow. So that is what fundamentally caused the slowdown and eventually bringing down of the network, is the fact that there was a fork in the network and the network was unable to decide which chain it should be following. And part of why this can happen is because that Solana is quite a complex blockchain. It introduces a lot of technologies or primitives which haven't been used, and in any system, the more assumptions you make, it can be harder to get a predicted outcome. So if you have a lot more functionality or steps going into a system, trying to get the output to be consistent can be difficult, which is why we have this sort of issue. But now I want to kind of take this past Solana and look at some other popular blockchains regarding their downtime. So in particular, I want to start by looking at the Bitcoin uptime. So Bitcoin's uptime is approximately 99.98% since its inception on January 3rd, 2009 at 2:54 a.m. GMT. So what this means is Bitcoin has had an uptime of about 9 years and 7 months, but it's had a downtime of about 15 hours. And the reason for this downtime, it comes down to two events, which we'll go into a bit more detail on. But what we can also see is that this downtime was focused around two different periods. The first being in the year 2010 and then again in 2013. But apart from that, so for the past 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, Bitcoin has had 100% uptime, which is quite impressive due to the scale of the network. And now the two issues which actually caused the downtime, we can look into a bit more. So in 2010, the Bitcoin downtime was related to an event called the value overflow incident. And generally what happened was on August 15th, one of the blocks created a transaction that created approximately 184 billion Bitcoins for a number of different addresses. And anyone who's familiar with the tokenomics of Bitcoin will know that there should only ever be 21 million Bitcoins in existence. So this was a sort of a red flag that how is it possible that, this many Bitcoins has been created in, 100x magnitude of what is expected. And effectively it was a bug that was able to happen because at that time there was no checks to make sure that a transaction of this sort couldn't happen. And then the resolution to this was that a few hours later, the creator of the network, Satoshi Nakamoto, actually just updated the code base for Bitcoin, which people adopted. And those Bitcoins were collectively decided to not be accepted as they were generated through means which were not necessarily illicit but shouldn't have been done. So that was the incident in 2010. And in 2013, there was a Bitcoin, the downtime event, which was quite different from 2010. Whereas in 2013, the network actually had a soft fork. And this was as a result of the versioning that was being used. So version 0.7 and 0.8 of Bitcoin software both diverged from each other. So that means that the blocks were being produced, however, nodes running 0.7 and nodes running 0.8 both decided to follow a different set of blocks that were being created. So this created a fork in the network. And that means that every address would have their Bitcoins duplicated. So your Bitcoin would exist on one fork and also the other fork, effectively doubling your Bitcoin. And now this can cause a lot of problems, especially on centralized exchanges, trying to understand which node or which fork they should be following. And it can mean that people can potentially sell twice the amount of Bitcoin that they actually have. And the result of this, that Bitcoin's price actually fell by 23% during that time. And again, this was in 2013, so the price fell by 23% to go down to approximately $37, which is still really far off the current prices. So during the time, it was a massive event. And it puts into perspective, right? So what I want to get at with Solana and Bitcoin, that these technical issues with the nodes and the networks can arise out of technical configuration. So because the code is complex in Solana, it can cause issues, or the way the consensus actually functions, it can cause issues. In the case of Bitcoin, it was more the fact that certain checks weren't being done on the network to ensure that Bitcoins couldn't be created, or to minimize the chance of the fact that forks would actually happen. And forking is quite a natural process to happen in blockchains, but there also needs to be a built-in resolution mechanism where these soft forks will eventually resolve. So in the case of Bitcoin, forks are resolved by identifying which chain is longer or which chain has the most hashing power behind it, and nodes will move to support that fork instead. And now I also just want to touch on Ethereum. So Ethereum recently moved to proof of stake, and this platform actually shows each block as it happens, and it shows which nodes are actually working on it. And I just want to look at this column on the right hand side, which is the uptime. And all of these nodes which are being selected have a 100% uptime. I've been watching this site for a little while now, and I haven't seen any nodes that don't have 100% uptime. And this is good because what it means is if certain nodes go down, if one node goes down, there will be a number of other nodes available to pick up the slack or the work that the node that went down would have otherwise been doing. And this allows the network to remain stable and have a lot of uptime, continue to create blocks and process transactions, even if some nodes face some sort of technical difficulties. And this is quite, again, I would say a feat of technical development and engineering, because having a system transition from proof of work to proof of stake in this manner is something that should be looked at and studied and understand how it was done, because getting everyone or a large number of people to move to a new system all at the same time while minimizing downtime is actually something really amazing. And potentially this is something that may not happen on Solana. If there was a large infrastructure update, there may be some downtime associated with it, whereas this hasn't happened on Ethereum. So that covers the sort of technical aspect of network uptime that I wanted to discuss. But I also want to discuss the decentralized aspect of it and how it can affect uptime. So this is an article from Cointelegraph, the aftermath of Axie Infinity's 650 million Ronin bridge hack. So this happened earlier this year, in March, and Ronin, an Ethereum sidechain built for Axie Infinity, was hacked for about $650 million. So here we have the official report from the company noted that the hackers managed to get access to the private keys to validator nodes, resulting in the compromise of 5 validator nodes, which is also the threshold to approve a transaction. The Ronin chain currently consists of 9 validator nodes, and the hacker managed to get access to 4 of them, along with a third-party validator run by a DAO. So what this means is that for this particular sidechain, there are 9 validators who actually carry out these transactions, and the consensus mechanism relies on at least 5 of them coming together to carry out a set of transactions. 5 of these nodes were actually compromised by the hackers, which means the hackers have full control over the network and are able to create transactions and verify it themselves, even if they are disingenuous. But we should also note here that Sky Mavis has ruled out the technical vulnerabilities as the core cause behind the exploit and blamed it on social engineering. So social engineering, it ties in very well with cybersecurity. That social engineering is a way where you can influence people, whether through speech or text or just human interaction in general, to get them to give up certain information or access to things that you want. And it's very hard to prevent against because it is all based on human interaction, and it's not something that technical solutions can actually protect against. And the point I want to make here is that we know that there were 9 validators for this sidechain and only 5 had to be compromised. In larger networks, if you say, for example, Bitcoin, where the hashing power is spread across globally, it makes it very difficult for these validators, or rather these miners, to all be compromised at the same time, which could lead to a significant impact on the network. We can take Ethereum, for example. If there is, say, for example, 100,000 nodes, it is unlikely that a majority of them will all be compromised at the same time, which could then influence the network. However, in the case of Ronin, because there are only 9 validators, only 5 had to be compromised for this attack to take place, whereas in my hypothetical with Ethereum, you would need over 50,000 of these validators to actually be compromised. And it is this decentralization which leads to high uptime for these networks. So with the Ronin chains, if 5 of these validators were to go down or be hacked, no transactions or no genuine transactions can actually be verified. Whereas in something like Ethereum, if a few nodes were to go down, these transactions could carry on being verified. And this expands to one of my other favorite blockchains, which is Algorand, right? As long as there's nodes running, as long as there's, at least one node running, transactions can continue to be verified. So it is very unlikely that all nodes will be taken down at the same time and the network fails as a result of a lack of decentralization. With sufficient decentralization, the risk of the network going down is almost non existent, and the majority of the risk then comes from technical issues, such as what we have seen with Solana and also Bitcoin, where technical issues are what cause downtime for these platforms. So, yeah, that's everything I want to cover today. I think network uptime is very important, especially with blockchains where the goal is to be, decentralized, always accessible. Making sure the network doesn't go down isn't great. And the fact that Solana had, 16 hours of downtime just yesterday, 6 hours of downtime yesterday alone is quite scary. So, that's for a quarter of the day. There was downtime on the network. You can't send any transactions or interact with any of the dApps or anything of the sort. And that, I think all blockchains need to do more to work towards decentralization to make sure that this doesn't happen. And I think, Bitcoin is currently doing a great job. And that comes down to the fact that the hashing power is distributed globally, that it is nigh impossible for a majority of it to be impacted at the same time. And if it was, transactions will still continue to be verified. The network would just be a little slower. But yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about. As always, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. But until next time, thank you and goodbye.